Welcome on, welcome all to the Amateur's Guide to Shogi, and welcome back to the 2021 Eiou Title Match Game 2 between Masayuki Toyoshima, playing in this game as black, and Sota Fujii, playing this game as white. The current game score is 1-0 to Sota Fujii, and just before I begin, I would like to read out a comment that I got on my last video from a very helpful person named Alexi, who cleared up some of the gaps in my knowledge when it comes to the Eiou tournament. So they commented that the first two Eiou tournaments were to determine a challenger for the Den-O tournament finals. This was for computers. I assume they mean that it was a tournament for computer versus human. From the third Eiou tournament on, it changed to a tournament with a title match. It started out as a best of 7, but then after a change in sponsors, they changed it to a best of 5 from the 6th Eiou on, which presumably means that this match that I am currently covering is actually best of 5. So thank you, Alexi, for filling in some of the gaps there and correcting some misinformation. Always very welcome if you know that something I said is wrong. So it is 4 hours on the clock, and let's just get started. Now, of course, with these two, as we've always seen, it's always going to start with what? Not the rook pawn? Yeah, so Masayuki Toyoshima starts with the bishop's pawn, open the bishop's diagonal, and yes, finally we get a differing opening than what we're used to. Except no, that hope is immediately dashed as they instantly transpose into a white's one-term loss bishop exchange, surprising absolutely nobody. Yeah, with these two, it's always going to be the same. They will always play the same type of openings, double static rook. We were given a little bit of hope there from that first opening move, but alas, it is the same. But as always with these two, the opening is incredibly boring, but the endgame is frankly insane. So I'll just quickly, kind of skip through a lot of these moves because it's just a whole lot of the same that we've already seen. Developing pieces, edge pawn pushes, rook file pawns, developing silvers to the center, sort of picking the king up, but sort of not really. Get a little bit of a pawn exchange. And then this is the first point in time where something remotely interesting happens, and that is that instead of simply retreating his silver, Sota Fujii decides to instead offer a silver trade, but then Toyoshima simply brings his silver back, and so does Fujii. And we end up with a situation where Toyoshima is actually like a step away from completing an actual full Yagura castle, but of course it's Toyoshima, so that's never going to happen. And instead we get another pawn trade. And believe it or not, Sota Fujii actually swings his rook across to 4th file. And it actually stays there for pretty much the entire game, in terms of on this side of the board. So my little antics in the beginning of getting, the same old has actually been destroyed this time by Sota Fujii, playing some ranging rook. So, hey, something different at least. Now, obviously, this silver is hanging, so you've got to do something about that. Drops a pawn to defend, but initiates a pawn trade, and we get this bishop drop. Now, this bishop drop, I don't think is necessarily aiming for this gold, but that could be one purpose of it. So, yeah, bishop for gold is... Technically, the bishop is worth more, generally, but... as a rule of thumb, if you trade off a bishop for a gold and in the process break down their castle, that is considered, generally a decent trade as well. Like, for example, with Yagura Castle, if this gold was here, a very common strategy is to put the bishop here and simply just trade it off for this gold, forcing this gold to recapture, trading a bishop off for a gold, which is an okay trade, but also in the process breaking down this castle and cracking it open from the side. But in this particular instance, I don't think that's what he's aiming to do. Certainly the computer doesn't like taking it. I think he's simply just making use of the fact that sorry, excuse me. Making use of the fact that this rook has moved from this file, creating this hole here, so that he can simply promote a horse somewhere along this diagonal. But Sota Fujii simply ignores this and goes on his own little attack, king castles, and he sacks a pawn, not so that he can recapture with the silver, but so he can drop another pawn aided by this bishop that he just dropped, attacking this silver. Silver simply drops back, and this square is defended 4 times, so I don't think that pawn is going anywhere anytime soon. Silver advances, and this same sort of idea that we see Sota Fujii use a lot, bringing both silvers from both sides of the board into the center, and then trading off, silver, and in the same process, developing his silver 1 square further, sort of threatening this square. Very nice little strategy there, using trade of a piece to bring your own pieces forward. And at the same time, now that these silvers, which were blocking up this file, have both moved, this rook is actually now completely open and can actually promote to this square, which would be, bad. So that is blocked instead. Now Fujii simply chases this bishop away with this gold backed up by the rook, and then again backed up by the knight. Obviously, Toyoshima kind of wanted to promote this horse anyway, but ends up trading it off for the bishop. And then Sota Fujii immediately drops the bishop with the same sort of idea of like taking off this gold and cracking down the castle. Or promoting it, I guess, but at the moment, all of these squares are covered, so I don't think it's promoting to anything here. I think he's just trying to simply snip off the gold and weaken the castle. And at the same time, if Toyoshima just like channeled his inner beginner, he might take with the rook and then allow this promotion. Probably wouldn't do that though. Anyway, Toyoshima drops his own bishop, actually a very powerful drop, you would think, threatening this weak square here, completely undefended. It would be attacking this rook, and also just a horse 2 squares away from the king on its home square is just not generally a good idea for your opponent there. But through a series of moves, as you will see, Sota Fujii actually kind of kicks Toyoshima's pieces around and ends up sort of taking his bishop. First kicks the rook back, then trades off the gold, and then drops the gold that he just got as a fork for these 2 pieces, getting back the material that he lost, regardless of what happens. And in this position, you might think, as I sort of did initially, like, oh, well, you could kind of just take this, and yeah, you lose the rook, but you get the rook back, and you've got the bishop from earlier when they traded it off, and you promote a horse to this dangerous position, and that's like really dangerous. However, you got to kind of think about what pieces your opponent is getting in hand, and what they can do with it. Because allowing your opponent, in this case Sota Fujii, to get the bishop in this position is not so bad, because there's no like great bishop drops. There just aren't any. However, if you did something like this and then allowed a rook drop here, here, or here, that's already looking pretty dangerous. Like, say, right here, the only 2 moves that you've got really is to bring the king here or here, because otherwise it's not defending this undefended gold. So say if you moved here, then yeah, that's basically game over. So you've got to be careful about what pieces you allow your opponent to have. And in this position, yeah, you could promote this and that would be pretty nice. But on the other hand, your opponent would get a rook, and this castle, I say castle, it's not really a castle. This home base position is terribly suited to an opponent's rook drop. So you cannot allow your opponent to get this rook. So instead, he saves the rook and gets ready to recapture the bishop with the rook. And we see an edge attack, and using this gold to that he's just got to try and kick away this or take this silver. You will often see this, actually, this sort of strategy. Silvers getting dropped on the back rank can often be mopped up by a gold or a rook on its belly, because obviously these 2 squares are covered, and it's completely surrounded and it can't go anywhere. So instead, Sota Fujii simply ignores it. He can't save it. Attacked on the edge, and tries to capture this lance. That is ignored because why waste a move when you're just going to lose it anyway? And instead, Masayuki Toyoshima simply goes on the attack because, let's be real, this isn't going anywhere. And he kicks this gold back first before going in. This moving the gold back, I think we had a similar situation last game where I think it was Toyoshima moving a gold back, and I was trying to explain why. I suspect it's just to keep it closer to the king's defense, as opposed to just taking this and being far away from everything. I'm not 100% sure though, but that I believe is the reason. But this, of course, allows this bishop drop, which is obviously a check. You could block it, but he instead just runs. But then he drops this silver, which is defended by the bishop, so the king can't take, and it is also threatening this rook. And it's also just a very invasive piece. Rook obviously has to run, captures the pawn, gets kicked out, captures another pawn, and then finally this edge attack comes into fruition. And then finally the silver is dropped. Why? Sorry, drops taken, because he needs more pieces in his hand to continue this attack up here. Obviously, if this silver were to move and promote or anything, it would lose defense of the bishop. So he needs more pieces in his hand. Finally takes the silver when he needs it. But running into this lance drop, which he literally just got, and this rook is trapped, but it actually isn't trapped because of this silver that he just got in his hand. Actually, this is a really cool drop if you want to try and find it. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to try and figure out where he drops the silver to save his rook. Hopefully that's enough time, or if you need to, you can pause the video. He drops it here, which is actually a really cool drop. It's a silver sack, sure, because it can just be taken, but it does threaten this rook, so rook for rook. But once it's taken, which it is, the rook finally has a square to run to, and threatening this this unprotected silver, obviously, and also sort of eyeing up the attack over here. And after this silver is taken and this silver is taken, you'd think that you'd want to like keep attacking and pressing and like take the gold for free, and and start surrounding the king. But actually, you need to block this rook's vision, because if the rook can see and defend this square, then this silver drop is devastating. It would be a king rook fork, and it would basically be game over at that point. So you have to prevent the rook from actually seeing into the castle. So this is blocked. However, Masayuki Toyoshima presses the issue, because this can be taken in two ways, but if you take it this way, you run into the same problem. Silver drop here. And if you take it this way, well, you can just take it with the bishop, and if you take it, then you run into the same problem, which you will actually see shortly. In the meantime, silver drop. This is free technically, but it's also not free, because that would relinquish control of this square, allowing this dragon promotion here, which would be incredibly dangerous, and also would completely remove the power behind this sort of attack. This silver drop, because once the rook moves, then there's no potential fork to exploit, so this silver is free to move and take this silver here. So the king has to stay defending this square, allowing the silver to just sit here. The gold was already kind of dead anyway, so the fact that it's attacked again doesn't really matter. And finally, this gold takes, horse takes, and as I said before, you can't take this because of this silver fork, backed up by the rook. So instead, Sota Fujii goes on the attack, drops this bishop, which, once again, can be taken, but also can't be. So you'll actually see the king move to the side. But this allows this drop, and this time you actually can't do anything. Because if you were to run, that would allow this anyway. And there's no other place that you can go to defend this square. So finally, Toyoshima has to relinquish it, and he takes the silver, allowing this promotion with a check. And runs the king right into the corner, believe it or not, and allows this horse to be taken, finally, because the threat of this drop is now gone. And I have just realized that I actually missed, a while ago, actually, in this position. This is actually an important moment in the game, in terms of time. Because after Masayuki Toyoshima played this move, taking the silver back, that marked the moment when both players had completely expended their time. Now, in chess, if you completely expend your time, you just lose, right? The first player to use up all their time just loses the game. In Shogi, it's not quite how it works. You have byoyomi, which is basically an allotment of time that you get for each move after you run out of all of your time. So, for example, 60-30 is a time format on my Shogi, and it means you get 60 minutes total to play as many moves as you need, and you can divvy up the time on those moves however you want. But after that, you only have 30 seconds to play each move. But you don't just lose the game because you ran out of time. You just have to make each subsequent move in 30 seconds. But it's still basically blitz or bullet. I don't actually know what the byoyomi is for the Eiou title match. It could be a minute, it could be 5 minutes, who knows, or it could be even divvied up amounts of time. And there's many different ways you can run byoyomi. I don't know what it is. Potentially, hopefully, someone will let me know in the comments. Maybe Alexi will let me know if they know. But regardless, they're both in byoyomi at this point. They're both on bullet time or blitz time. They've both expended their time. And this point here, when this happened, was the 97th move of the game. This game is over 160 moves long. So at move 97, that's a little over halfway. And at this point here, I mean, it's barely even an end game. You could argue that this is actually just a middle game, not even an end game yet. So the fact that they played an additional basically like 60 or 70 moves in blitz time and the quality of their endgame skills during blitz is just astonishing. But anyway, yeah, they've both completely used up their time, and at time afterwards, these sequence moves that I've already showed you happened. Dragon comes in, promotes, king runs, and the horse is taken. Now it's just a question of who can attack who faster, basically. And Toyoshima has to defend this because he simply doesn't have the resources to attack right now. And pushes the dragon back, simultaneously attacking this rook. He drops a pawn, probably just as a time gainer. Then drops this, drops the gold. They defend each other, and he simply initiates a rook trade. But that actually allows him to first play this cool pawn drop, and then play this rook drop. The pawn drop was to bring the gold forward, because now this is actually a fork of pieces, obviously threatening to promote a dragon and also just take 3 pieces. Obviously very dangerous, but there is a way to block it. As Sota Fujii shows, you can drop the bishop here, simultaneously cutting off the rook and defending this knight. But this silver drop, obviously you can't take it because you would simply lose the bishop and let the dragon promote. So instead, the king runs, attacking the rook. Rook trades itself off, and the bishop, which he just picked up, is immediately dropped, attacking the king. And already this looks pretty dangerous, but Sota Fujii runs his king directly into the flames, because, as you will notice, Toyoshima doesn't actually have any pieces in his hand apart from pawns. But even still, this looks pretty dangerous, but of course it's definitely not a mate because he needs more pieces in his hand. However, he finds a way to continue attacking. He takes the gold, trades it off, drops this pawn, defended by this gold, which he put there a while ago when he initiated that rook trade, pushes the king back, and then drops this gold here, pushing the king back even further. Obviously, these two defend each other. And then he can't do any more checks, but what he can do is promote this pawn, and this is an incredibly powerful threat mate. As you can see, either of these two moves would be checkmate, and it is effectively unstoppable. This is basically a brinkmate. You can run the king. There might be some drops you can do, maybe rook drop or something, I don't know, to defend. But it's basically a brinkmate. It's a very powerful threat mate. However, this was not a checking move, which means that Sota Fujii has the opportunity to go on the attack, and he has this bishop, 2 rooks in his hand, and 2 generals. If you know anything about Sota Fujii, you know that he can do a lot with that amount of pieces. And he is the master of finding mates, even on bullet time. But is this a mate? That is the question. Well, you can certainly try and stop and figure it out if you want to figure it out. But if you just want to enjoy the show, let's get going. First, he drops the rook. King moves to the side. He drops the second rook, basically forming like a chess ladder. Obviously, this is blocked because the king can't run any further. Silver is dropped, taken in one of the two ways that it can be taken. Oh, whoops. Sorry, guys. It's annoying how close together these buttons are that go to the end. Okay, here we go. Double rook drop, silver is taken, rook sack for the lance. Obviously, the king has to take it as the only move. Lance drop, the lance that he literally just got, checking the king, which is blocked. But the bishop from before comes in with a check. You could take it, but that's dangerous. He takes it anyway, and is then subjected to this trade here. Takes it. Silver drop, obviously you can take the silver, which he does. Gold drop, king has to run, but that allows this gold to take this pawn, backed up by the rook. King moves back, it's virtually the only move. You could also move here, but that allows this gold to take the silver with a discovered attack from the rook, which is obviously blocked. Silver drop, oh my god. Sorry. Okay, discovered attack from the rook. Silver drop has to be taken. Gold takes gold. King takes, and then this lance, which has been sitting here since basically half a game ago, finally gets into the action, but unfortunately it is too little, too late, because after this pawn drop, Sota Fujii resigns the game. Why? Basically because this is not a mate. He tried his hardest, but even Sota Fujii, with his amazing mating ability, could not find a mate in this position in such low time. And truth be told, I don't think it even was a mate. The computer certainly was saying that it was no mate. However, of course, Sota Fujii had low time, but Toyoshima also had low time, so the chances that he accidentally makes a mistake and stumbles into a mate is obviously, there's a decent chance of that happening. So it could have turned into a mate, even if the computer was saying that it wasn't a forced mate. Regardless, Sota Fujii can't mate his opponent, and, contending with this basically brink mate has no other option than to simply resign, bringing the total game score of the Eiou Title Match to 1-1. Toyoshima fighting back here to retain his title. I still think that Toyoshima is the current title holder. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that. Once again, I'm sorry about accidentally clicking that wrong button twice and sending it to the end. Hopefully that wasn't too much of a spoiler. But hopefully I covered it up quickly enough. Regardless, I hope you all enjoyed that insane endgame on very little time. And I hope you all continue to enjoy my recaps, and I hope to see you all next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.